All right. Thank you to the Upfront team for having us here. Shervin, it's great to be with you today.
Great to be here.
Let's dive right in. We've got so much to talk about. Shervin, you had humble beginnings, grew up in Iran, came here as an immigrant, and at once, all of a sudden, popped up and became one of VC's biggest legends. I think I learned that within 90 days of being at Menlo, you led the round, the Series A or B at Uber. Tell us a little bit about how you made that leap. And we were also talking recently. You had the loss of your mom and the role that she played in your life. It was something you've been reflecting on. So, love to just hear about how does someone from that background get the seat at the table that you got?
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael. My mother, Ishrat, passed away in December 24, so not too long ago. But she was the greatest human I've ever met, and really everything I work on in my life comes from her vision and her character. I miss her very much. But even though she's not here physically, she's here spiritually, and everything that I try to do to honor her legacy. She had a vision that was pretty deep that she would tell me as a kid of one world and bringing the world together. And she was an idealist and the biggest heart I've ever met. And I always say she taught me how to dream in color. She had massive dreams. She was the one that convinced my dad over a 24-hour conversation to escape from Iran and come to America for a better life, especially for my sister, Bita. And so she's the reason we came to America. We came to America with $35 in our pockets. She was an educator, but she worked multiple jobs, one as a maid, the second as a cafeteria worker. My dad started, getting his PhD while driving a taxi in Washington, D.C., which ironically later when I did Uber actually helped. And they taught me that anything is possible if you work hard enough. And she took me to her computer programming classes in the 80s. When you had the punch hole cards. And when I begged for an Apple IIc, she convinced my dad. And back then it was $3,000 for an Apple IIc, which in 1980s dollars is like $10,000. So they worked multiple shifts for months to surprise me with the Apple IIc. And that changed my life. I wrote a letter to Steve Jobs back then, proposing a new design for the Macintosh. And years later, when I met him, I told him, and I was like, I'm still waiting for a response to my letter. But yeah, she was my original inspiration. And to get to the point of becoming a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley and an entrepreneur, I couldn't have done it without her faith and belief and support. When I started my first company, WebOS, at Berkeley, I didn't have enough money for a laptop, and she secretly put it on her credit card and didn't tell my dad, and was a little rebellious. And I worked a security job at night, writing the business plan and the initial code for WebOS, and the rest is kind of history. But I'm just really glad that she was alive to see all of the dreams she had come true. It's kind of a typical American dream story. There's many other people with similar types of stories of coming to America. And that's, really important to keep that American dream alive. It's a core part of the Silicon Valley engine of innovation and entrepreneurship. So many of those entrepreneurs are immigrants similar to us, and coming here with just a dream and a few dollars. So I also have to give thanks to Sheryl Sandberg, who mentored me. And she's the reason I went into venture. I had a social gaming company. I started first Facebook games and then Apple on the iPhone when the App Store opened up in 2008. And she read an essay that I wrote about entrepreneurship and Facebook in I think it was 2008 or 9. And she reached out to me. We had lunch and she mentored me, and when I told her I was selling my company and thinking about what to do next, she knew I had done a couple of angel checks with the little money I had at the time, and And she said, Shervin, you need to go into venture capital. You'll be disruptive. I just didn't think I had a seat at the table. There wasn't any other VC partner on Sand Hill Road that was Iranian at the time, had my background. And so she wrote an email to like 5 top VCs without telling me. And I started getting these recruiting calls.
Wow.
I heard the email is really good. I haven't seen it, but it worked.
You've got to dig it up
from like Kleiner Perkins and Menlo. And I decided to go with Menlo because they really showed a lot of faith in me, and that as a rookie VC that I could start doing deals immediately. And I had a wish list at the time. I was very lucky in 2011 when this happened. I had a list of companies like Uber, Airbnb, and many others that I thought would be amazing companies to back. And this was at the beginnings of the iPhone and Android and the App Store. And at the time, at my social gaming company, I had 1 in 4 iPhones had one of my games. So I felt viscerally the power of what that was going to bring to the rest of the world as billions of people begin to come on these platforms. And so I chased Uber, and in my first 90 days at Menlo, I closed Uber, Warby Parker, Machine Zone, Tumblr. It was quite a ride.
An epic start.
Yeah.
So you had these, an incredible role model, incredible mentor, and as I've gotten to know you, over a decade now, I associate you with just like thinking big, and one example of that, kind of the other side of that, you recently did a podcast on 20 VC. Highly recommend to the audience you watch this podcast because if one of my favorite books is actually PayPal Wars, and I think you suggested in the podcast, hey, maybe we need to write Uber Wars.
Yes,
and you kind of dissected why. And one of the things you said in the podcast, I think it's even in the highlight reel of it, is like, if Uber had stayed on its trajectory, of when Travis was the founder, the CEO, that sort of trajectory, you think it would be a $1 trillion plus company business today.
No doubt.
And I'm just curious, like, what are the key lessons, for VCs, for founders, coming out of that, if we've lost, I guess, $850 billion of value or so, what are your biggest takeaways?
I am very focused on founder-led companies. If you look at most of the companies that become now the $1 trillion plus companies like Meta and Google, Alphabet, et cetera, these are heavily founder-led companies. And the classic, now it's become, the lore of Silicon Valley. Firing Steve Jobs was one of the biggest mistakes in Silicon Valley until the firing of Travis Kalanick at Uber. And when you have an incredibly brilliant founder, you don't get rid of them when they're at their absolute top of their game in execution. If you look at, like, when I did Uber, it was a couple thousand cars and 1.8 million in revenue. And in like 3 years, we were already at $1 billion in revenue. It was the fastest growing company in history. So it was a critical mistake by the VCs led by Bill Gurley at Benchmark to cut the head off that way in such an aggressive.
I think we have Bill speaking
way.
Tomorrow, so maybe.
Yeah, great.
We'll see.
You can
see
tell
what he
what
has
I
to say about
said.
it. What about founders? What can they do? I mean, like, are we
Be careful who you bring to your board.
Yeah.
Be careful whose money you take. Do your diligence. Look at the history. Look at the patterns of behavior. In that case, Bill had done this multiple times to many founders like Naval Ravikant when he was at Opinions. So it was kind of known in Silicon Valley that this was like a playbook move. When something went wrong in the relationship, he would, play dirty. And we found out, and this is like, we need to have standards in the venture capital world of like, this isn't the kind of behavior that should happen.
Well, there's a ton of spice on this subject in the podcast, so everyone check that out. But,
yeah.
one of the others, interesting takes that you brought up was the VC model as we know it is dead. And you're someone you've returned, I think, $3 billion in profits to LPs over time, and so the model's done well for you. But now, if what does it mean the VC model is dead? I mean, there's a ton of VCs here, LPs here. What does the future look like? How are things changing? What are the big takeaways?
I mean, the golden age of venture was really that 2011 time period. It was kind of the last era of the classic venture model, really being able to provide the types of incredible returns that we were used to. And I'm specifically talking about early stage. Growth stage, you don't have to be that smart to do that well, but even that, people...
But you can be that smart, just for any growth investors.
And so, right now, just as an example, because I was in that era, because I had the right thesis and I was aggressive about it, I've distributed $3 billion in profits. The Uber stake of $26.5 million in that round, if people held on to it today, it would be worth $7 billion, 88% IRR. Like, that's not possible today for the average VC. And so, the question is why. One, those days, the early stage valuations were reasonable. Like, I did Postmates at 5 million pre. Uber's seed round was 4 million pre. And so, you can't even touch that in this era. And now you have multi-billion-dollar seed rounds. And so, I kind of look at the trend of what happened in 17 to 2021. I call it the drunken period of venture, where private equity firms started to come downstream into venture. I feel a little responsible because I brought TPG with my former partner. We brought TPG into Uber. We introduced Bonderman and Coulter to Travis, and jumped on their plane and did 5 countries in 6 days, and squeezed them into the round with Google, the Series C. And a firm like TPG had never come down to the Series C level of a company ever. So it kind of changed the landscape in Silicon Valley, and the Tigers and the Coatus and SoftBanks, everyone began coming downstream. But then they lost the discipline of what the art of venture capital is supposed to be about, which is listening to the signal, supporting foundational founders early, and backing them, and using some sanity in your models. And so that's like the systemic break that's happened. And the other area that I am actually excited about that reminds me of what the former era was like is the venture studio model. So I created a venture studio called Edison Labs. We have our first rising, about to be a unicorn company called Telly, which I had the idea 3.5 years ago, and my profound luck to meet my co-founder, Ilya Pozin, who was the founder of Pluto TV, was like, to me, he's like a young Steve Jobs. He can do everything. It's like a Swiss Army knife. And founders like that, like Elon, like Jobs, like Travis, Brian at Airbnb, who I backed, they are Swiss Army knives. And when you find them, you just should count your luck and go all in. And I did. And that company is scaling incredibly fast. It's right here in Los Angeles. And I needed that proof point that, with a venture studio, you could actually create a company, own a large stake in it, in the venture studio, limit the amount of initial capital, and then raise the right amount of seed, A, B, et cetera. And, Telly has been a prime example of that, where we've done the business model innovation. The product is beloved, and it's in every state in the country. It's a new type of television. If you go to telly.com, TELLY.com, cool, you'll see it, and it's free. You get a free television at home, and it's all supported by advertisers.
Taking notes. Start a venture studio.
But yes, and you've done this in many ways with FabFitFun, Michael. Like, you and Daniel have actually backed some amazing ideas and founders, and essentially you've reverse engineered a venture studio. Elon to me is actually the greatest example of a venture studio. Like all of those companies are Keiretsu, interconnected. The talent migrates back and forth between the companies. They support each other.
Totally.
From a platform perspective.
If we could invest in Elon Inc., it would probably
some of our friends have done that. I was lucky to invest in SpaceX in 2014, but some of our very close friends have created that. In Antonio Gracias has the Elon Index. But to me, people think about Elon the wrong way. They think of it as it's this brilliant entrepreneur. Yes, he is, but he's running the most successful venture studio in the world, other than Alphabet. Right, because Alphabet has done that, and they've created multiple amazing businesses. But Elon has taken it to the next level of being able to do it across multiple categories.
Right. No,
the more
my original co-founder at FabFitFun, one of we had a mix of people, but was Sam Teller, who his official title when he was in Elon World was director of the office of the CEO. Which is the closest for working for Elon Inc. Right, because there were so many companies and so much to do there, but and actually Sam is in some sense a Upfront adjacent alum as the former head of Launchpad LA when that was kind of a studio here. So
it's the nascent stages of a venture studio. Like if you're, I'm working on a venture studio index and backing multiple venture studios, and I'm lucky to be in 32 seed funds, and so you get to see a lot of signal. And I'm pushing a lot of my friends that have these seed funds to also create their own venture studios.
Very cool. Switching gears for a second, because the thing that's brought me and you closer together, especially in the last couple of years, we've known each other and we've talked tech and we've talked startups, et cetera. But the world changed. For a lot of people in the last 18 months, there was the election, but even in close to home for me was 10/7, and in the direct aftermath of that, I saw something you put out called the Cyrus Accords, and being this very outspoken voice and you've always been outspoken. That's not new, but on this issue specifically around Iran, Israel-related issues, et cetera. And so maybe just talk for a second about kind of your advocacy in those areas, and specifically, I think the Cyrus Accords were one of the coolest framings I've heard of on these topics.
Again, going back, I owe it to my mother. Like when I was a kid, she raised me with the folklore and the legends of Cyrus the Great, and who is in the Bible and was a visionary, wrote the first human rights document declaring human rights for everyone in his empires, the freedom of religion. He was so ahead of his time, 2,500 plus years ago. And he was a humanitarian. And that one world vision that my mom had, he was actually building that and executing on it. And what he did with the Jews who were slaves, and in Babylon, he conquered and the emperor of Babylon, and he freed the Jews, and then returned them to their homeland in Jerusalem, and rebuilt their temples and funded it 2,500 years ago, which is why he was honored and is in the Bible, and he's honored by the Jewish community every year.
Hugely. He's a messianic-like figure. In
Absolutely, but he was a real human and an incredible leader. So I actually owe the Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, who's speaking tomorrow, and we're doing a little private conversation with him tomorrow as well, who's the son of the last king of Iran, and he's really stepped up in the last few years to help lead a movement for freedom in Iran. And I was born there. We escaped with like bombs falling in Tehran and from Saddam, and my mom was super courageous in getting us out and joining my father, who had also had to escape, who was on the execution list by Khomeini for helping lots of people escape. So I grew up with these stories of Cyrus the Great, and then also these stories of how evil this Islamic regime is, who has really enslaved 88 million Iranians, who are, as many of you probably met Iranian Americans in the diaspora, are incredibly brilliant people, very family-oriented, have contributed, trillions of dollars of economic impact to America with a very small population. Imagine if, for the last 45 years, if Iran had continued on its path of development. You look at what the Emirates has done, UAE has done in just the last 30 years, really the last 20 years. You look at what MBS is doing in Saudi, the speed at which they're doing it. We lost so much, and the impact of having a terrorist regime that cares nothing about women's rights, that cares nothing about human rights, is murdering these young people. 70% of the population is under the age of 30, and they all are yearning for freedom. So, what I did is I invest in freedom technologies, specifically with the idea of spreading democracy in places.
This is one of the coolest things, because it's you're at once you've been doing advocacy, but kind of bring the tech into it, right? And say like that. Well, what's my role? What's my purpose in all this? And you've I don't know if you coined the term, but you've certainly been the one that I've heard most say this word, freedom technologies, which is really cool idea. So talk a little bit about that. Like what is that? Like how do we invest in freedom technologies?
Absolutely, and the whole point is like what's the point of creating all this innovation if we don't actually use it to spread good in the world? And so in this case, because of what I went through, what my family went through, what my people have gone through. It helped inspire this idea. I was having dinner with Secretary Clinton in 2010 at the State Department with Jack Dorsey and Eric Schmidt. And I specifically said the last bastion of dictatorship is the router. And what these dictators do, as soon as there's a revolution or a protest, they block, what do? They block the router, they block the internet, they block Twitter, Facebook, et cetera, to keep people from communicating. So the logical next step was, let's use satellites to bring internet on backpack routers and create mesh networks. And so I flew to Benghazi 2 weeks before Gaddafi was killed, went to Tripoli in the first month of its liberation, went to Tahrir Square during the protests. Against
Sounds dangerous.
Mubarak. And it was dangerous. But I mean, what's the point of, again, life if you're not willing to risk it for something greater than ourselves? So I, when the Women Life Freedom movement happened a couple of years ago, I reached out to Elon and Starlink team. I had taken Elon to Cuba, and we helped negotiate this freedom of an American hostage there, and we were trying to bring internet there, same kind of principles of freedom technology. So I reached out and I said, hey, I'd love to get some Starlinks, and I'll figure out a way to get it to the women in Iran, because they're blocking their ability to communicate with the world, what was happening on the ground. So I flew here to LA, went to Starlink factory, bought a bunch of Starlinks and figured out ways to smuggle it through 3 different routes into Iran. There were 9 Starlinks at the time, and now there's thousands. And it's been an important thing to do in helping spread the movement. And hopefully, I think, God willing, the next 3 to 4 years, there'll be a movement to bring democracy and freedom to Iran, which will stop this gravy train of oil and gas money from Iran being spread to Hamas and Hezbollah and all the terrorist organizations that they've had this octopus strategy of causing absolute mayhem in the Middle East. And enough is enough. Yeah. Like we need to have a peaceful Middle East for the benefit of the Middle East itself, and also for the benefit of the rest of the world.
It would be epic. I've never been. My parents were born there, so it would be a dream for me to get back there.
I love your parents.
To visit one time. Thank you. And just last question, because you see we're running short on time, but I came across a tweet yesterday post on X yesterday that I was like, whoa. You said, there was BC, there was AD, and now we're in AGI1. That 2025 is almost like a whole new, era in human civilization. So much so that we might need to reset the calendar. And this is year 1 again. Is AGI here? What have you seen? Is it a freedom technology? Should we be excited? Are you optimistic? Tell us about what does AG1 have in store for us?
I think we should be cautiously
AGI1.
optimistic. But yeah, the post was about just a few things that are happening. I do a lot of stuff in investments in quantum computing. I did a SPAC with Emil Michael and Eric Schmidt and took the oldest quantum computing company public, D-Wave. My previous fund is in IonQ. I did PsiQuantum. What's coming down the pike, and Google just had the Willow announcement, is really the ability to almost have the mind of God, the power of God in these quantum and AI and AGI capabilities. Problems that would take billions of years to solve can be solved in days, and it's hard for the human mind to comprehend what's about to happen. And what I was saying is yesterday is that the 2025 to me feels like the end of the old world that we grew up in, and the beginning, really the real beginning of the 21st century. Even though we're 25 years in, this is the beginning of the 21st century. Everything's going to accelerate exponentially. Super intelligence, the ultimate kind of where AGI is going to fundamentally change our world in every single industry, every single aspect. Even the idea of nation states, which is why we started the network state movement. All of these things are changing, and I think this is the greatest time to be alive in the human species. This is the beginning of a new, essentially the framework of a new civilization. And as investors and entrepreneurs, the amount of disruption and the amount of good that can come out of it the next 25 years is great. The amount of bad that can come out of it is also great. And we have to be able to be balanced and work together as a community to make sure the things that we're funding are leading to the widest good for all humans. We need an age of abundance. Otherwise, everything will fall apart.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Shervin. Yep. Welcome to AGI1. Thank you.